Okay, welcome to my video, you guys. Thanks for coming. I have decided to record some of my stories. So this one was chosen by Maddie. I'm here with a room full of teenagers, and they're going to help me ask questions and listen to my stories. So this one was chosen by Maddie, and it says, when I'm a teenager, can you please make it so that I'm not a scary teenager that does bad things that I would be afraid of? Can I please be a Christian when I'm a teenager? So I prayed this prayer when I was a little girl, when I was about 9 years old, and I was the second in my family. So I looked at teenagers and I thought, those are incredibly scary people. And what am I going to be like when I'm a teenager? Did you guys ever have those thoughts when you were a little kid and you looked at teenagers and you kind of thought about them, and they're scary when you're little? And so at a certain point, when I was like 8 or 9 years old, I actually prayed this little prayer. I didn't write it down at the time, I wrote it down later. And I really believe that God hears the prayers of little children and that they are precious to Him, especially when it's something like this, where you want to honor the Lord and you're not sure if the you grown up is going to. But I believe God answered this prayer in a really special way. And it's not like some of my other God encounters where sometimes a verse was brought to me 3 times in an evening, or sometimes it was brought to me by different circumstances and situations. This is more providence. And have you guys heard about providence? You know what it is? Providence is when you look back on something and you see that God has worked in it. At the time, you don't really experience this big thing. It's just you look back and you can see the hand of the Lord like a thread through your life. So I would say that this one was answered in a quiet way. I am so thankful that I started going to camp when I was a kid. I came from a different kind of a home. My parents had come out of a cult right before I was born. We were having church in our living room with just our family. And I didn't have a lot of other influences in my life. It was kind of my family trying to figure out which way was up. And there was a lot of things I didn't understand about what it meant coming out of a cult that I later found out had a lot of impact on my family. So when I was 9, I was allowed to go to this Christian camp, to Camp Embadine, and I am so thankful, because that's when I started having some influence besides just my family, because I went to public school, and so the only time we would have talked about God was at meeting, and meeting was church in my living room, and then camp. So at camp I started to experience just a lot of people sharing about the Lord, and it helped me so much. When I was about 14, at some point we did start going to another church just in the evenings. We didn't join that church, we weren't a part of it, but we did go and hear the preaching every Sunday night. But there was a man in that church when I was about 14 years old, and he said, "Hey, I think you should be a camp leader." And so I didn't realize you were supposed to be 16, but he said, "It doesn't matter. You are mature enough, you're going to be a cabin leader at camp." So at the age of 14, I became a cabin leader at camp. And that was really, really good for me to step out and to have 12 kids in my cabin, have another cabin leader that was older. And really, it was a mentoring situation where I learned how to minister to a group of kids. It was very healthy for me, and I loved it. I started to get involved in that community. If it hadn't been for that community, I don't really know where I would have ended up. So camp was definitely a huge part of discipling in my life and just growing as a Christian, because I was sharing what I believed. Another huge turning point was when I went to high school. I was excited about it because I heard that there were Christian clubs. So I was this kid in grade 9. I didn't have any Christian friends. I didn't really know a whole lot of other Christians in my day-to-day life. And I showed up at this little club that was called Campus Life. And there weren't very many people there, but they invited me to this party this one night. And so it was a party for all the campus lives, all the teenagers through the whole city of Victoria. So my parents dropped me off at the curb, and I walked up and I knocked on this door of these strangers' house, and nobody else showed up at the party. Out of all the teenagers that were going to all the campus lives in all the high schools of Victoria, nobody showed up. I was the only one. And when the people answered the door, I recognized this lady, and she was a choir director. Actually, she was the director of these musicals, Youth for Christ musicals. And I had gone to it the year before because my cousin had been in this musical. So right away, I saw this lady. I'm like, oh, you're the director of Youth for Christ Choir. And she invited me in as the only person at the party. And then her husband came home. He was a cop. And she and her husband and I sat around eating a lot of food because nobody else was there. And they turned out to be such a huge influence in my life. They ended up going ahead and becoming missionaries, and I ended up going on missions trips with them to Venezuela and up island to a First Nations reserve, and they mentored me in such an amazing way. I'm so thankful to have people like that in my life that spoke into it, because as I say, my family had come out of a cult. They loved the Lord. They were also foster parents, and there was a lot of chaos and things happening in my home. And so to see this Christian couple that loved each other, that taught me things like, you need to read your Bible every day, and here's how to read your Bible every day. You need to pray, and here's how to pray. And these people, even though I was a super shy kid, they did things like put me in charge. They made me a leader. They made me a leader of a small group with the husband. So he and I were leading a small group, and then in one of our missions trips. So the missions trip was broken up into 3 groups, and they had kind of like a main leader and then a junior leader. And I look back and I think, why did they make me a leader? I was the most unsuspecting person to be the leader of this group. But they did things like that, and they taught me things that I have never forgotten, like, is the work well done? Is the word well read? Is the Lord well pleased? And I'm just thankful for them. And I look back and I see that the Lord had his hand on me. And I wonder how much of that is because of this little prayer that I prayed as a kid. And I'm just, I see that as an incredible answer to prayer in a quiet way. Okay, does anybody have any questions about what I was sharing in my pink sweater about being a Christian as a teenager?
Yeah, I was thinking, do you think it's the point that we have a community that we can grow with and learn more about God with, especially as teenagers where we can feel like we don't have a lot going on?
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like that is such a huge part of it, and I feel like it is like a coal that's in the fire with all the other coals. It grows, and then when you separate it out and you put it all by itself, what happens?
It cools down.
Yeah, it gets cold pretty quick. I feel like it's really important to have community, and I think that's why Jesus told us not to forsake getting together with the believers. I think it's super important. Anybody else? Okay, thanks, Wyatt.
And cut!
I think there is a question from the studio audience there.